Hello and welcome, this is Jenna from McGuire. Today's video is on the longer side because there are actually two big parts to it. First, I'm going to show you a technique that I call shadow stamping. I've done variations in the past, in past videos on this technique, but I used it today in a very simple way to create 10 cards very quickly. The second part of this video is going to focus on the newest colors of inks from Simon Says Stamp. A lot of people have been asking about these colors, so I'll give you a closer look. Let's first get started by creating the shadow stamping cards, and I'll be using some of those new ink colors in this. I'll be using two new stamp sets from Simon Says Stamp for these cards. The first is this Many Thanks set. This was designed by Dawn at W+9, who's a great artist, and they're designed for these stamped images to stamp on top of each other. So you stamp 2 or 3 images on top of each other to form a beautiful flower or leaf. So what I'm doing here is taking the images off of the stamp set so that I can kind of plan. I'm stacking them on top of each other so I have them ready to go when we do our stamping. You'll see the other script stamp set over there to the left. I'll be using those sentiments a little later on in this video. Since I want to make several cards today, I'm going to be using the MISTI stamping tool. However, you can use a large acrylic block instead, and I'll talk about that in a moment. This is the MISTI stamping tool. You put the paper you want to stamp on here inside the tool, and then the door that you'll see there on the right, you put your stamps, you ink them up, and you close the door, and it stamps it exactly where you want it. So what I'm doing here is I have a piece of paper that's cut to what size I want to stamp over and over again, which is about 5 1/4 by 4 inches, just slightly smaller than a note card. Now I'm taking the first layer of stamps, the largest images from this stamp set, and I'm placing them with the stamp side down onto the paper. I'm just positioning where I want them to end up stamping in the corner of this card. So this is just the planning process. Once I have all the images exactly where I want them, I'm going to take the door of this tool and close it on it, and that will transfer all of the images onto the door. If you had a large acrylic block, you would just press the large acrylic block here, and they would all be clustered together perfectly how you want them on your acrylic block. Now I'm lining this up with the 1-inch mark there over to the left every time because the images hang off the bottom of the paper, so I can't have it right in the corner. So this is my first piece of cardstock for a card. I put it into my MISTI, and now I'm inking up all of my images with a white pigment ink. I like the Hero Arts Unicorn ink, which is a white pigment ink, or the Simon Says Stamp white pigment ink. So I've got my paper perfectly positioned at the 1-inch mark, so I just close that door onto it, and I have all my images exactly where I want it. Here's the fun part of this card design. I want to do the exact same ones on the top corner, so I just flip the piece of paper around, ink it up, and stamp it once again, lining up with that 1-inch mark. And now all the flowers are on the bottom corner and the top corner in the exact same way. So just does a great card design. Now, if you do not have the MISTI stamping tool, that's okay. All you would do is arrange all of the flower images onto a large acrylic block, stamp it in the bottom corner and on the top corner, and it's the same thing. The MISTI tool just makes it easier and makes it faster. But you can do this with a large acrylic block or a stamp press if you wanted to. Now I'm going to repeat that, inking up the flowers with white ink and stamping it in the bottom corner and the top corner of a bunch of colors of cardstock. And every time I get that nice white ink against the bright, colorful background. Again, these pieces of cardstock are cut slightly smaller than a note card, so they're about 4 1/4 by 4 inches. And I did this with 10 pieces of cardstock. This is a great thing to use with designed to use for scraps of cardstock. I think it works best with darker colors just because that white becomes more bold on the darker colors. On the lighter colors of cardstock, it's really subtle, but you can use it, and I'll do a few light ones too. Now you'll notice there I didn't stamp entirely on that bottom flower. The nice thing about the MISTI is it's real easy to ink it up and stamp exactly where you did before, right on top. With an acrylic block, you would just have to look through the block and try to line it up, but you can do it that way. So I went through and stamped the first layer of flowers with white ink on all 10 pieces of colorful cardstock. Now it's time to add that second layer that you see there, that pool layer of ink that's on top of the white. We're doing that with the second layer of stamping. This is really simple. It's kind of hard to explain, so I'm going to show you. In that stamp set, as I mentioned, there were images that are meant to stamp on top of each other to create something beautiful, these beautiful flowers. So I'm going with the second layer stamps, positioning them right on top of the first so that we can transfer these onto the door of my MISTI, or if you have an acrylic block, onto your acrylic block. So this is a stamp set that is designed to stamp one image on top of the other. If you don't have any stamp layering sets like that, don't worry about it. You can do this technique with, say, like a flower. You stamp the flower once with a white ink, then you stamp it again, but slightly offset with the colored ink, and you'll get a cool result. I'll link to a video here that shows that. So now I have all of my second layer of stamped images over on my MISTI door and ready to stamp right on top of the first images. I'm using one of the new colors of Simon Says Stamp inks. This is Scuba, and I'm going to stamp it right on top of the first, and you get this really cool look. This almost has a shadow look to it, and it looks like you use 3 inks when in fact you only use 2. So what you see there is the white that we stamped in the first place. In some areas you see like a darker color blue ink. That's where that Scuba ink hit the blue paper on the background. Then it looks like there's this medium shade of ink color. That's where that Scuba ink landed on top of the white ink that we already stamped first. So you get this really cool layered effect. This technique works great on colored cardstock, when you stamp with white pigment ink and then a matching colored dye ink on top of that. So we have a pigment ink which sits on top of the paper, that's that white ink. Then the dye ink that kind of absorbs through that pigment ink a little bit but has that soft look to it. So here on this example, I'm using Blue Jay ink, which is a beautiful blue color, new one, and I'm stamping that on top of the white ink on this blue piece of paper. I think it's best if you use the same color ink as the cardstock below it. Maybe lighter, maybe darker, it really doesn't matter. But I think if you use a blue color ink, you want to use blue paper, a yellow colored ink on yellow paper. You can mix it up if you want to, but I love the tone-on-tone look. You can see how helpful the MISTI stamping tool is with this since we're making so many, but you could be using a large acrylic block or a stamp positioner instead if you wanted to. Okay, so after I went through and did this with all the colors, I'm adding this little circle image from the stamp set as kind of berries on these little stems that I put in there. And I thought it would be easier to do these all at once instead of with the stamp positioner. So I'm just going through and adding these little berries with white pigment ink on all of my cards. Then I'm going to go through and stamp with the matching color dye ink slightly offset on top of those. This didn't take too long. You could have skipped this if you wanted to and just had those little stems kind of stick out, but I thought these little berry kind of images would be fun to use. So after I've done them in white on each of them, now I'm coming in with that matching color of ink and stamping right on top of the white with a little offset. So it just allows some of that Scuba ink to hit that back cardstock to give that little shadow look. I will say if you were just making one of these cards, you could do each of these layers individually and just stamp them all one at a time. I just like putting them all onto my MISTI tool or a large acrylic block just to save some time, and I can make a bunch at once. And just a little word of warning, remember that that white ink is a pigment ink, which takes a long time to dry. So I recommend at this point going ahead and zapping this with your heat gun to just allow that white ink to dry before we move on to assembling this card and adding embossing. Okay, so for the sentiments, I'm just going to white heat emboss a variety of these large script sentiments from Simon Says Stamp in the center of all of these cards. I'm using my embossing tool to put some powder down so that we don't have any static. Then I'm going to stamp each of them in each of the sentiments in the center of the card with Versamark ink and then add some Hero Arts white embossing powder. This is my favorite white embossing powder because I think it's the most true white of any of the powders that I have. Then I'll go ahead and heat set that, and there we have our finished panel. I'm going to do a different sentiment on a few of these cards just so I have some ready to send to friends when I need them. Another option here would be to not stamp the sentiment in the center at all. Just save the background, and then when you need a card for occasion, you can add whatever sentiment you want. So I went ahead and did a variety here. I have 10 different card fronts ready to go, and it didn't take long at all because they're all stamped the same way, just with different inks on top and different sentiments in the center. You can see even the pale turned out okay. I think the darker are more fun, but the pale is nice too. Now there's one more step I'm going to show you that you can do if you want to. You don't have to do this. If you want to add more depth to this, just go in with a good white colored pencil. You can buy Prismacolored white colored pencils individually, and that's a great one. And just add little bits of highlight here and there onto your images, and this just makes it pop even more. You could totally skip this if you wanted to, but if you're looking for a way to add even more highlighting to this or the look of more dimension, this is a great little trick. You could also use a white pen, but white gel pens are pretty vivid. This is a little more subtle and just a way to add a little bit of interest. You can see the difference between the top and the bottom there. Now it's time to assemble these cards. I'm going to put some glue on the back of the stamped panel and then add a piece of craft foam that I cut slightly smaller than that panel. And then I'll glue that onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding note card. By using a piece of craft foam in between there, we end up with a nice raised even dimension behind it, and it'll go through the mail very nicely. So I did that with all 10 of my cards, and then we have this nice set of cards that we could give as a gift. But to be honest with you, I'm keeping all of these cards to have on hand to send to friends because I'm running low on cards and I need some more. I send out a lot of cards, and you can see the fun dimension that you have to that, and I just love the rainbow of color. Before I dive into the second half of this video where I talk about the inks, there's one thing I wanted to mention because I know people will probably ask about it. In this video, I am working on a white grid paper. That is this new pad of paper available from Simon Says Stamp. It's very large, and it allows you to measure things on the grid paper and get inky and stamp on it. So you can use this as like your scrap paper. So what I find I'm doing is I create a few cards on it, and then when it gets too dirty, I can tear it off and go on to my next sheet. I found this helpful because it has those great grid lines which help you to line things up and measure them. I still like working on a craft sheet, but there are some techniques where I think it's easier to have paper behind you, so this is a nice option too. These are broken up into 1 inch areas and then 1/4 inch in between that. This pad is 11 inches by 17 inches, and I think it has 50 sheets on it. So I just wanted to mention that. And now let's go ahead and talk about the new inks from Simon Says Stamp. There are 12 new inks in this collection, and they're all like a summery, sherbety color. These are the 12 inks, and I encourage you, if you haven't watched a video that I've done about the properties of these Simon Says Stamp inks, I encourage you to do so. I'll put a link here and in my description below. These inks are like the Hero Art Shadow inks. When you stamp them, they look a little dark and splotchy at first, but as they absorb into the paper and kind of settle, they end up nice and solid and beautiful. Now, I have been getting a lot of emails asking how these new colors compare with existing colors of inks, so I thought it'd be best if I show you each of the colors along with my ink swatch book so you can see how they compare. This is Rosy Cheeks. It's the first of the 12 colors, and it's kind of a peachy pink. Here it is against my pink inks, so you can see it's a little peachier than these, and I'll also show you up against my peach inks on the next page here. As I'm going through these, if you need a closer look at how this color compares to others I have here, you can hit pause and look and see if you have any of the colors and how it compares. Okay, so next we have Hollyhock, which is a nice true pink. It's a little bit of a deep pink, but not dark. You can see it's very rich, and it's a little bit deeper than the Bubblegum Hero Art Shadow ink, which is one of my favorites, so I like that it's a little bit different. By the way, this is my ink swatch book that I created with the free ink swatch downloads that I have over on my blog, and I'll link to a blog post and a video here and in my description below in case you want to create your own. And I have free ink swatch downloads for all these new inks, of course, also. Oh, and by the way, this Hollyhock ink looks really nice with the slightly darker doll pink from Simon Says Stamp. Those two would look nice together. Okay, so next we have Sunkissed, which is a great kind of peachy orange color. And you can see how this compares with the others here. This is great for, it's a very trendy color right now, great for summer cards. And I think it looks nice with a lot of the other colors in this collection too. This Sunkissed color is darker than the Rosy Cheeks color I showed you earlier, so those two work well together. Now the next color is Melon, and this is probably the most unique of all the colors in this collection. I really like it. It's like a soft orangish yellow color, slightly darker than Hero Art's Soft Vanilla Shadow ink, and slightly lighter than the Simon Sunkissed that I just showed you. Those three together would be beautiful. So this is a nice light orange color. I think this would be great for flowers or the center of flowers or for sunshine images. Yellow ink is an ink that I use quite often, and the new yellow in this collection is called Duckling, and it's a very buttery yellow, very warm color yellow. And you can see how it compares to the Sunshine and the Golden Locks, which are in the Simon collection, and it's a little bit lighter than Butterbar from Hero Art Shadow. Now we have Catkin, which is like a soft olive color. It's a very unique color, and I think this is good for adding a different shade of green to leaves and maybe some of your floral stamped images. Another new green in this collection is Jelly Bean Green. Now I have a lot of green ink colors here, so you can see how it compares to a lot of them. I think it teams up nicely with the slightly darker Freshly Cut Grass from Lawn Fawn. Or on the bottom left there you see Green Leaf from Simon, and I think it teams up nicely with that. It's a little bit lighter. This brings us to my favorite color family, which is like the pool color family. This is Spring Rain from Simon Says Stamp. Now this is a little more blue than the mint inks I have, and a little more green than the pool inks I have. It kind of sits in between. So it really would work nicely with either family, either the mints or the pools. So you can see how it compares to some that are out there, but I think it works nicely with many of them. Now earlier I mentioned that the melon color was one of the most unique colors in this collection, and I also think this one is too. It's called Scuba, and it's a nice bright middle tone of a teal color. So you can see it works nicely with many of these pool colors that I have here. And it also works nicely with many of the darker kind of teal colors that I have. I think it looks nice with that Tide pool, which is all the way on the top left there from Hero Arts. And it's slightly lighter than some of the other dark colors that I have here. So it's a nice middle color that I really didn't seem to have any inks for. Another one of the best ink colors in this collection is Blue Jay. This is like a light royal blue color, just a good all-around basic blue. You can see it looks nice as a lighter shade to go with some of these royal blues on the bottom here. And it's a little brighter blue than the Hero Arts Cornflower ink, which is one that I use often. So this is just a good basic all-around blue and would be good for like maybe a cloudy sky. And funny I say that because the next ink, actually the name of it is Cloudy Sky. That's the one here. It is a light blue with a gray tone to it. So it looks nice with Stonewash from Hero Art Shadow Ink, which is a darker ink, and the Caribbean Blue from Simon Says Stamp. Then we have purple, which is called Wisteria. This is a good, I call this like an all-around good guy ink. It's like a good purple, just nice right in the middle purple color. And I think purple inks are hard to find, so this is a good option. And that's the 12 colors. I actually use 10 of them on the cards that you see here. And so you can really use these ink colors tone on tone with any color scraps that you have on top of the white ink for that shadow stamping technique. Okay, so I squeezed a lot into this video. Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure I covered it all. If you are interested in any of the products I talk about here, the stamps or the inks, I link to everything below in my YouTube description, and you can go over to my blog for a lot more information. You can also find the free ink swatch download for these new inks if that's helpful to you. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope you'll return again soon.